Few percussionists in rock history have commanded such a mixture of reverence and apprehension. Even years after his passing, this particular drummer's name evokes memories of revolutionary technique paired with legendary volatility. He fundamentally transformed rock percussion, though his personality ensured few enjoyed working alongside him for long. Colleagues described him as unpredictable and explosive. One famous guitarist remarked that this drummer represented both the pinnacle and the challenge of collaborative music, capable of transcendence one moment, intimidating the next, seemingly relishing both extremes. What drove this complex artist? What truths lay behind his genius and his struggles? Let's explore the complete story. This drummer's story begins in the aftermath of World War II, in working-class South London. Born in August 1939, he was the son of a construction worker and a protective mother. His father died in the war when the boy was only 4, a loss that left permanent psychological scars. The musician later explained that his aggressive playing style stemmed directly from his childhood trauma. The anger embedded in his performances traced back to that moment of paternal loss, a wound that never healed. Growing up on a council estate, he navigated a difficult adolescence. Initially, cycling captured his imagination, and he dreamed of becoming a professional racer. His lean, athletic physique from cycling would remain throughout his life. However, a serious accident with a taxi ended those racing aspirations. The following years brought violence and aimlessness. He joined local gangs and engaged in petty crime. After leaving gang life, he was attacked with a weapon by a former associate. His future seemed uncertain and potentially dark. Music found him almost accidentally. A classmate introduced him to Britain's leading jazz percussionist, and everything changed. He began practicing on makeshift equipment, eventually purchasing his first proper drum kit. This jazz mentor became crucial to his development, though the relationship carried serious consequences. The mentor taught him how to create swing in his playing, but also introduced him to heroin, a dependency that would shadow him for decades. By the late 1950s, he was establishing himself in London's jazz scene, performing in underground clubs. He joined several traditional jazz bands, but found their conservative approach limiting. He craved the freedom and intensity he heard in American jazz masters. The British jazz community didn't quite know how to handle this volatile young drummer, with his razor-sharp temper and even sharper snare work. He was dangerous, musically brilliant, but personally combustible. During this period, he attempted to create stability through marriage in 1959. His wife gave birth to their first child in 1960, with more children following. However, his relationship with family was strained, to put it mildly. His daughter would later describe the difficulties of living with someone so temperamentally explosive. Around 1962, he replaced a future rock icon in an influential British blues band. This group served as an incubator for the British blues boom. Here he first encountered a Scottish bass player whose virtuosity matched his own combustible energy. The two musicians immediately recognized something in each other: brilliance, competitiveness, and trouble. Their onstage chemistry was undeniable, but so were their clashes. The bassist's melodic lines danced provocatively around the drummer's complex rhythms, and their musical conversations frequently ended in physical violence. Both musicians then joined an organization led by a keyboardist saxophonist in 1963. This group fused blues, jazz, and rhythm and blues into something heavier and darker than the pop music dominating radio. In basement venues, they unleashed extended improvisations that owed as much to avant-garde jazz as to traditional blues. The drummer's performance, rolling tom-toms, thunderous accents, impossible time signatures, left audiences stunned. He created visual spectacle, a blur of motion and intensity. But his temper was already legendary. He reportedly fired bandmates mid-performance and destroyed equipment. One famous incident involved him attacking the bassist with a blade after a performance. The bassist responded by striking him with his instrument, leaving their guitarist watching in tears as two talented madmen destroyed their musical partnership. Despite these conflicts, when he played, even his enemies had to listen. His technique was genuinely revolutionary. Unlike most rock drummers who maintained steady backbeats, he approached percussion like a jazz musician. He constructed rhythmic architecture, weaving in triplets and patterns influenced by African music that gave his playing both sophistication and menace. His trademark setup with two bass drums, inspired by a jazz drummer but used to forge a sound that prefigured heavy metal and progressive rock, became his signature. A founding member of an iconic heavy band later acknowledged that without this drummer, many musicians wouldn't have understood what heavy even meant. In 1966, restlessness led him to make a move that would change music history. After growing disillusioned with his current situation, he attended a performance and was astounded by their guitarist. He approached immediately with a proposal for a new band. The guitarist was both intrigued and wary. When he learned the drummer also wanted the problematic bassist, he hesitated. The drummer simply grinned and insisted it would work. Thus was born the first supergroup in rock history, a volatile experiment from day one. Three virtuosos, each with enormous ego, confined in the same room. Rehearsals were battlegrounds, but the music worked. Their debut performances in 1966 overwhelmed audiences. They were loud, improvisational, and ferocious, far from the tidy pop acts of the era. The drummer's percussion was central, not merely supportive. His extended solo pieces redefined what drums could do in rock music. Critics struggled to categorize them: jazz, blues, psychedelia, or something entirely new. Their first album blended traditional covers with originals hinting at heavier things to come. But their 1967 follow-up catapulted them to genuine stardom. Recorded in New York, it fused psychedelia, blues, and experimental poetry into an era-defining sound. One particular song, with its heavy riff and martial drum pattern, became an anthem. The drummer's rhythm, inspired by African tribal drumming, drove it forward relentlessly. He explained later that African records taught him that rhythm could communicate meaning beyond mere timekeeping. In San Francisco venues, the band would extend songs past 20 minutes, essentially performing jazz in a rock context. One promoter noted that solos went on endlessly, but audiences remained captivated because the drummer made it dangerous. His solo showcase piece became a rite of passage for young percussionists. Future legends would cite it as a masterclass in controlled aggression. As the band conquered America, he found himself both celebrated and feared. On stage, he mesmerized. Off stage, he terrorized. He berated road crew, argued with promoters, and feuded constantly with the bassist. The guitarist became a reluctant mediator between two warring generals. Substances complicated everything. His paranoia and volatility deepened despite claims he could manage his habits. His interviews from this period reveal a man whose ego and sense of victimhood constantly competed. To music magazines, he boasted about being the world's best drummer. When told another famous drummer disagreed, he dismissed his rival as entertaining but not truly musical. The two maintained bizarre mutual admiration that sometimes curdled into rivalry. The other drummer once sent him an expensive animal as a gift, knowing the cost of maintaining it would be financially devastating. He named it after a mental condition. Yet his influence on drumming was seismic. He brought jazz, sensibility, syncopation, improvisation, rhythmic dialogue to rock. Like his rival, he made the drummer a frontline performer rather than mere timekeeper. One musician later said he was the first rock drummer to be a true soloist, transforming the role from timekeeper to expressive voice. Their success was meteoric but brief. Between 1966 and 1968, they released 4 albums, sold millions of records, and established new standards for live musicianship. But internal friction was equally intense. On tour, the drummer and bassist sometimes refused to travel together. Backstage fights were common. One concert ended with the drummer hurling equipment at the bassist's head during performance. They admitted hating each other, yet acknowledged the on-stage magic. By mid-1968, the magic was disintegrating. The guitarist, increasingly disillusioned by tension, announced his departure. The drummer was furious and devastated. The band announced farewell performances and recorded a final album that closed their era with both brilliance and bitterness. Their final concert was filmed for posterity. The drummer's solo that night was particularly mesmerizing, a kind of primal exorcism, thunderous and unrelenting, a man battling demons through rhythm. When they dissolved, he was simultaneously world-famous and utterly lost. He'd been crowned the greatest drummer alive, but his band was gone, friendships shattered, addiction tightening. Music had changed, he reflected years later, but it nearly destroyed him in the process. His daughter later explained that the family had grown to 3 children by 1969, still living in modest circumstances while he toured globally. Only after the group's dissolution did he finally use earnings to move the family to a better home. A significant culture shock for his children. The downside was that home life was appalling. His daughter recalled arguments and difficult situations, including discovering him with young women she knew personally. He also had affairs with notable figures, including a famous feminist author, one of few people about whom he consistently spoke positively. He was fully indulging in rock star excess, which his patient wife tolerated, for a time. As 1969 began, he was determined to reinvent himself. He wanted to escape what he saw as commercial circus, craving something grander and more exploratory. The idea that followed seemed inevitable. Another supergroup, this time with the guitarist again, plus a soulful prodigy from another famous band on vocals and keyboards. When a bassist from yet another group was added, the lineup was complete. From the start, this new project carried massive expectations. The press hailed it as the sequel to their previous success. He bristled at comparisons, insisting this was something new and more musical. But old tensions resurfaced quickly. The guitarist wanted restraint and feeling. The drummer wanted scope and fire. One member recalled later that he couldn't stop soloing. He played as if he had to fill every space or explode. Their debut album remains curiously uneven, part blues rock, part spiritual jazz. On some tracks, the drummer's thunderous playing dominated, culminating in a massive 15-minute improvisation. The album topped charts on both sides of the Atlantic, but the band barely survived its own tour. They debuted before 100,000 people in London in June 1969, a show as much about spectacle as music. The drummer, dressed immaculately, looked like a prophet at a tribal gathering. But the subsequent tour was fraught. Fans wanted their previous band's fireworks. The guitarist wanted subtlety, and the drummer was descending into exhaustion. After only 6 months, the project imploded. They admitted it was finished before it started. Too much, too soon, too many substances, too many expectations. Still, something crucial had shifted. Amid the chaos, he discovered a new obsession: Africa. He'd long been captivated by African rhythms, tracing them through jazz and blues to their roots. During the previous tour, he became close with a Nigerian percussionist who introduced him to explosive West African drumming. He said he'd been searching for that sound all his life. In late 1970, restless and flush with royalties, he did something extraordinary. He packed his life into vehicles and drove from London to Nigeria, a 7,000-mile journey across deserts, war zones, and broken borders. The expedition, documented in later writings and a 2012 film, became one of rock's great mad odysseys. He bribed officials, dodged bandits, and nearly died of thirst in the Sahara. When he finally arrived, half delirious, he built his dream, the first 16-track recording facility in West Africa. He insisted he didn't go to bring rock to Africa. He went to learn. He immersed himself in local drumming, befriending a pioneering figure whose revolutionary blend of jazz, funk, and traditional rhythms electrified the continent. He joined this artist band, performing marathon sets and recording a searing live album. The record's centerpiece featured a rhythmic dialogue between his polyrhythms and another drummer's hypnotic groove, a drumming conversation across continents. He later said this other drummer taught him more about percussion than anyone, that this man could make a simple beat communicate profound meaning. His African years were both transcendent and chaotic. The studio became a hub for visiting musicians. A famous songwriter recorded a major album there in 1973, but his finances and temper unraveled. One friend noted he had a genius for finding trouble. Wherever he went, chaos followed. He quarreled with the Afrobeat pioneer, was accused of interfering in local politics, and fought with Nigerian officials over unpaid taxes. Yet he remained fiercely proud of what he'd built, saying the studio proved you didn't need famous British facilities to make great music. Before Nigeria, he'd fronted another ambitious project, a sprawling jazz rock collective blending African percussion, brass, and rock instrumentation. The group debuted at a major London venue in early 1970. The chaotic concert became legendary. Their album captured the sense of adventure. Horn-driven jams fused Afro-jazz with psychedelic rock long before world music became a marketing term. Yet, as ever, his projects burned bright and briefly. By 1971, the collective had splintered. Musicians couldn't afford touring costs, and his leadership style, imperious, erratic, often as chaotic as any dictator's, drove people away. One saxophonist said he didn't lead, he commanded. He admitted he was impossible, expecting everyone to play like gods and losing his mind when they didn't. Still, his influence radiated. The fusion scene that flourished in the early 70s owed something to his hybrid vision of jazz freedom and rock intensity. He might not have enjoyed commercial stability, but he'd opened doors others rushed through. By the mid-1970s, problems mounted again. Nigeria's economy was collapsing, corruption was rampant, and his substance habit had deepened. He tried to get clean, briefly entering treatment in England, but addiction's grip was relentless. He insisted he was never an addict, just a user. Few believed him. He'd been on and off medication for years, and his finances were in ruins. His daughter recalled he'd have substantial money one month and nothing the next, could earn a fortune and lose it in the same week. In 1976, after a series of failed ventures, he fled Nigeria amid threats from creditors and government. He relocated to Italy, then Los Angeles, then back to England, always chasing new starts and old demons. Yet music remained constant. In 1978, he joined experimental players in New York, recording sessions showing his enduring inventiveness. But his temperament made long-term collaboration impossible. One musician recalled he was a genius, but you couldn't tell him anything. You just had to hang on and hope he didn't explode. Throughout these years, he maintained a peculiar dual identity, revered innovator and pariah. Musicians from various genres cited him as a god. Others warned newcomers to steer clear. Another person who decided to steer clear was his wife. After discovering an affair with a teenage hospital worker, she finally lost patience. She confronted the other woman physically, then kicked him out permanently, saying she'd tolerated groupies, but is spending all their money on substances and expensive hobbies, now combined with a teenage lover, was the final straw. In 1980, he briefly formed a hard-edged fusion outfit, and later joined a cosmic rock band, pounding his drums and space-themed jams that seemed designed to punish both himself and his audience. One bandmate said he hit like a hammer, but when he locked in, it was incredible. He could make time bend. Outside the stage, life was messy. His relationship with his children was disastrous. One son in particular had a very bad relationship with him. This son said his father loved them in his own way, but his moods were terrifying. He'd been disowned so many times it was as if his father had already died. He himself admitted he'd been a poor husband and father, saying he wasn't made for domestic life. He was a drummer. That's all he knew. The mid-80s found him living on the verge of bankruptcy in a ramshackle Italian farmhouse after marrying and divorcing the hospital worker in the space of a year. Now he was breeding horses for polo and falling in love with the sport. Polo became his obsession, played with the same ferocious skill as his drumming. However, polo is expensive, and he ruined his finances pursuing it. One friend said he'd rather spend money on a horse than on himself. He'd eat poorly for a week to pay for equipment. An old friend joked that his three great loves were drums, heroin, and horses, in that order. By the late 1980s, he'd reinvented himself as a kind of expatriate drumming guru. He collaborated with African percussionists, taught masterclasses, and occasionally resurfaced in high-profile projects. In 1990, he married again. In 1994, he reunited with the bassist for a power trio featuring a guitarist. The chemistry was explosive as ever and just as toxic. Their single album briefly charted, but the tour collapsed amid old animosities. The bassist later sighed, "They should have known better. Some things don't change." Yet he was mellowing, at least by his standards. He spoke more openly about his past, the substances, the temper, the wasted years, and began receiving overdue recognition as a pioneer. Modern drummers cited him as a blueprint. One famous drummer said his feel was unreal. He played from somewhere deep, like the drums were an extension of his anger and joy simultaneously. Critics began reassessing him too. What once seemed excess now looked visionary. His long solos, once derided as indulgent, were recognized as pioneering. His obsession with African rhythm, once eccentric, was now central to rock's evolution. In 1998, his life took another improbable turn when he moved to South Africa, seeking quiet and space for his horses. He built a ranch and tried semi-retirement. But even there, peace eluded him. Local disputes, financial troubles, and family estrangement followed like ghosts. He split from his latest wife and was largely estranged from his children. By the early 2000s, his health was failing. He had chronic lung disease, degenerative arthritis, and heart problems. Yet he continued performing when possible, leading a jazz group. The shows were spellbinding, half free jazz, half ancestral invocation. One musician said he played like a man at peace with chaos. Then in 2005, something miraculous happened. His original supergroup reunited. After nearly 4 decades of silence, the three agreed to perform shows at major London and New York venues. Concerts sold out instantly. For fans, it was resurrection. For the band, a wary truce. He said dryly they agreed not to kill each other. The performances were restrained but powerful. No 20-minute solos, no shouting matches, just 3 old masters finding common ground one last time. The guitarist said it was beautiful. They played like grown-ups for once. Behind the scenes, however, old tensions simmered. The bassist said later that neither of them had really changed. Still, the reunion brought him a final taste of vindication. He'd outlived his rivals, his critics, and most of his demons. And though he'd never call it redemption, he seemed quietly proud, telling an interviewer he was still alive and that had to count for something. When the applause faded in 2005, he walked off stage smiling, a rare sight. He muttered backstage that he supposed it was closure. He didn't kill the bassist didn't kill him, and the guitarist didn't run off crying. To those who knew him, that counted as harmony. The reunion proved something simple and profound. The three musicians who once defined the volatile spirit of the 1960s could, in their 60s, still ignite the same chemistry, minus the violence. After the reunion, he briefly basked in renewed fame. He appeared in documentaries and gave reluctant interviews, even seeming to enjoy attention until questions about his past soured his mood. Asked whether he and the guitarist might record again, he snorted there was no chance. One was too rich and he was too poor. Yet even as his body deteriorated, he refused to stop playing, saying it was the only thing he could still do right. The next decade became a twilight of defiance. In 2009, he formed a jazz ensemble. Their sets were a spellbinding mash of bebop, Afrobeat, and avant-garde experimentation, powerfully austere. Critics noted how he, now in his 70s, played less but said more. He'd learned to leave space, to let silence swing. But age brought new fragility. Decades of smoking, substance abuse, and relentless touring had taken their toll. His back was wrecked from decades, hunched over the kit. Everything hurt, he admitted, hands, legs, heart, but he still heard the rhythm. When a journalist arrived to film a documentary in 2010, he found the drummer frail, yet ferocious, chain-smoking and railing against everyone he'd ever known. The documentary, unflinching and tragic, introduced a new generation to the contradictions that defined him: genius, cruelty, wit, wreckage. When the filmmaker tried to leave, he famously struck him with a cane. The filmmaker later said he hit him because he liked him. That was his way of showing affection. But beneath the venom was strange serenity. In moments of reflection, he admitted he had no regrets. He spoke of the greats he'd known and the sense of rhythm that still haunted him. When he played, he said he could hear spirits talking. Not religion, just rhythm, life itself. The documentary revived public interest, but also reopened old wounds. His ex-wives and children appeared, some bitter, some forgiving. His daughter described him as a force of nature, not really a father, but a weather system. He typically didn't deny it, saying he was only happy behind drums or on a horse. Indeed, even in old age, his passions remained the same. Although he did find time to marry for a fourth time in 2010 to a nurse 42 years a junior. On a South African ranch, he kept horses and a small circle of friends who tolerated his moods. The property was beautiful and half falling apart, a perfect metaphor for its owner. Visitors found him surrounded by dogs, smoking endless cigarettes and blasting jazz records at dawn. He was, as one friend said, a retired volcano that still rumbled. He remained fiercely opinionated. Modern drummers bored him. He dismissed heavy metal and insulted famous drummers. Even his compliments were backhanded. Asked about jazz drummers, he conceded a few had something, but insisted most didn't swing. And if you can't swing, forget it. Despite his gruffness, there were glimpses of tenderness. When the bassist died in 2014, he was devastated. He wrote in a rare public statement that he was very sad. They were like brothers, and sometimes worse. He refused to attend the funeral, saying he wanted to remember the bassist as he was when they were kings. The guitarist later said he wept privately. For all their battles, the bassist had been his mirror, the only musician who could match his fire. His final years were marked by both creative bursts and medical crises. He suffered a serious fall from a horse in 2015, shattering bones. He thought he was finished, but they patched him up. The next year, doctors discovered a severe heart condition. They told him if he had the operation, he might die. And if he didn't, he'd definitely die. Not much of choice. He underwent open-heart surgery in 2016 and barely survived. On his blog, written in shaky but still caustic tone, he told fans it was a big problem and no more performances for now. It was terrible. Yet even after surgery, he tried to perform. His group played sporadically, sometimes with him seated behind the kit, like an ancient warrior refusing surrender. His bandmates described him as frail but focused. When he counted in, the years disappeared. One musician said you could still hear Africa in him. In 2019, after years of recurring illness, he was hospitalized near Canterbury, England. His family's statement in late September was brief and ominous. He was critically ill, but still with them. For 2 weeks, fans worldwide waited for updates that never came. On the morning of October 6, 2019, he died at age 80. His daughter announced the news online, saying he'd passed that morning, was in no pain, and had recently been laughing and listening to jazz. The message implied a peaceful end, but behind the scenes, reality was inevitably more tangled. By his final months, his family had fractured almost completely. His young wife was said to have limited access as his health declined. Disputes over his estate surfaced almost immediately, with accusations that documents had been changed and children excluded. It turned into a legal feud of resentment and recriminations carried out in tabloids. The family alleged his wife even hid his drum kit and used it as leverage in the standoff. The truth was shocking in that there was so little to fight over. After decades of excess and wild spending, he was as broke as he'd been when born into impoverished southeast London. Elsewhere, the rock world responded with reverence and disbelief. The guitarist called him a unique force, adding no one ever played like him, and no one ever will. Famous musicians posted tributes. One drummer called him the alpha drummer. Another wrote that he changed how people think about time. Even a metal drummer acknowledged that without him, he'd never have picked up sticks. For all the accolades, his legacy remains complicated, and that seems fitting. He despised nostalgia, rejected hero worship, and spent his life refusing to be tamed. His career zigzagged through genres and continents, from jazz clubs to supergroup fame, from African studios to South African ranches. Few musicians lived as many lives or burned through them so fast. What he craved was truth, in rhythm, in performance, in fury. He once said he couldn't fake it. If he played, he gave everything, and if he couldn't give everything, he didn't play. In his final interviews, he seemed oddly serene. He told an interviewer he wasn't afraid of dying. He'd been close plenty of times. It was just another rhythm, one you can't hear. When asked what he hoped people would remember, he laughed and said that he was the best drummer that ever lived, or at least that he scared people. Music isn't polite, he insisted. It's dangerous. Always was. That's the story of a force of nature in rhythm and chaos. A drummer who revolutionized his art while living on the edge of destruction, never apologizing, never retreating, always playing like his life depended on it.